Okay guys, it's Miss Checka. I'm here. I'm gonna try not to be so perky because I'm actually here to tell you about a horrible disaster that happened here in 1919, the Great Molasses Flood of Boston. Or sometimes they call it the Boston Molasses Flood. First of all, what is molasses? Molasses is sugar. It's like a sugar syrup. It's a byproduct of cane. So if you have read Alice in Wonderland, the Dormouse tells the story at a tea party about a treacle well, because in England they call it treacle, but you can picture like kind of a, sticky, sugary substance that you can put in your tea to sweeten it. If in your history class, if you've read about the rum trade, one of the byproducts of molasses is that if you ferment it, it makes rum, which is alcohol. And this was used in the triangle trade. People would trade rum for slaves. Don't do that. That's like horrible and will lead to like many injustices and like genocide. But this is what people did in the 1700s, is that they used molasses to create rum, traded it for people. Another byproduct is ethanol, and weirdly, in 1919, byproducts of molasses were used in munitions plants. So they basically used it to make weapons. So this is what molasses is, and hopefully you have a mental image at this point of not something that is like maple syrup that you put on your pancakes. It's really runny, but a really thick, goopy liquid. This is a sort of liquid that would behave more like, picture ketchup or toothpaste or whipped cream. Like if you move the container, it doesn't move very much, but if you kind of whack the container with your hand, all of a sudden it'll jolt. That's more like what molasses would behave like as a liquid. I'm telling you this because, as you can tell from the name of the disaster, there was a flood. There was a flood of molasses. So basically this plant, this manufacturing plant, which is used to be where this park is now. So if you look behind me, you can see boats. You can actually see old Ironsides from here. That's the Atlantic Ocean. Right there used to be a plant that manufactured molasses, and they had this massive tank. It was a 5-story tall tank, like a vat of molasses, and it was metal, and it was held together by rivets. So like I have on my jeans little tiny rivets, or they're kind of little metal pieces that are keeping the fabric together. So you can imagine the rivets in a huge 5-story tall tank are quite large. Unfortunately, the plant did not do everything that they should have to make sure that this vat was safe. Like one of the safety things that you're supposed to do is to fill it up with capacity with water to make sure that like the tank can hold liquid. They didn't do that as much as they were supposed to. Also, the molasses would leak in seams in the metal and around the rivets. The molasses was leaking out, and people in this neighborhood in the North End at the turn of the century, they wouldn't even buy molasses because they knew they could just go out to this huge tank and scrape it up the sides. So everybody knew that this tank was leaking, but the manufacturing plant, their solution to this was to paint it brown. So if they painted it brown, you couldn't tell that stuff was leaking out. So another theory is that they filled it up too much. They knew that it was leaking. They knew that they probably shouldn't fill it up to capacity, but it's 1919. And if you know anything about American history, this is 1 year before Prohibition happens. So they were trying to make as much rum from their molasses as possible before, Prohibition happens. You can make other kinds of alcohol. So all this creates kind of a perfect storm situation. You have this huge tank. It's filled way past where it should. It's not well built in the first place. Everybody knows it's leaking. There's a huge amount of this liquid in there, and it's fermenting. If you ever have left something, a liquid, too long in the fridge that ferments, you know that one of the things that happens is that it expands, and that heat will make something expand even more. Which shouldn't have been a problem because this is Boston, and the day that we're talking about was in January. It's January 15th, 1919. Unfortunately, on this day in January 1919, we got this like mini heat wave, and it was 40 degrees in Boston, which, you know, doesn't sound like it's super hot, but for Boston for January, that is, you know, it's like basically summer. So the day was much, much harder than usual. The molasses inside the tank was expanding, and all of a sudden, pop, 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 the rivets burst out, and the vat basically exploded. So you had shooting out like these like metal shards, the rivets coming out, and then imagine that, like, you know, toothpaste or whipped cream, when you smack it, that molasses came out, but it didn't behave like water. So it like, there was this first huge surge out, but then it stopped. And that was terrible, because what that meant was that in that first huge wave, people got stuck in it, horses got stuck in it, the firehouse was almost taken entirely off of its foundation, carriages, houses, buildings. It went up the streets of the North End towards downtown, and it moved the foundations of the elevated train. I mean, it was a powerful wave. If that had been water, it would have moved like that and then receded. But because it was molasses, it basically moved out and then stayed. So the kind of nightmarish element that happened is that these horses and animals and the objects are in there, they couldn't get out of it. Because, like, imagine that you're swimming like this. Well, if you move back with your arm like this and then go in, you're basically moving the molasses back into place. So you can almost picture like quicksand. So 21 people drowned in it. 150 people were injured. I didn't even get the count of animals. It was a lot. So there were a large number of fatalities, or a large number of casualties. As you can imagine, it took ages and ages and ages to clean it, because they had just these vast amounts of sugar, like syrup, coating everything. And all the people who got stuck in it, or who were rescue workers, they got it all over themselves, and then they got onto public transportation and went home. So even in the outer areas, for months and even years afterwards, people said that you could still feel like sticky surfaces everywhere. And then people said that for years and years afterwards, that on a hot day, if you breathed deeply, you could smell the kind of sickly, syrupy smell of molasses. So that is the story of the molasses flood, the Boston molasses flood. And shout out, this story is for my friend Lloyd Miller, who wrote a song about this, which is amazing. My friend Lloyd Miller lives in New York City, and he writes songs about history. So, Lloyd, this is for you. That is all I can think of. All right, until next time, it's Miss Checka.